John VI was Greek. He was a Greek from Ephesus who reigned during the Byzantine papacy. His papacy was noted for military and political breakthroughs on the Italian peninsula. John assisted Exarch Theophylactos, who had been sent to Italy by Emperor Tiberius III, and prevented him from using violence against the Romans. John succeeded in inducing Duke Gisulf I of Benevento to withdraw from the territories of the empire through tactics of persuasion and bribery. According to some sources, he single-handedly convinced the Lombard Duke Gisulf of Benevento to withdraw his forces and return home after the Duke had devastated the neighboring Campanian countryside and constructed an encampment within sight of the city walls of Rome. Distressed at the sufferings of the people, Pope John sent a number of priests furnished with money into the camp of the Lombard Duke to ransom all the captives whom Gisulf had taken. Other significant events during John VI's pontificate include the Lombard king Aripert II returning the Cottian Alps to their former status as a papal patrimony. Numerous construction projects also occurred. He also promoted Easterners within the episcopal hierarchy, including Boniface, the papal counselor. He was buried in Old St. Peter's Basilica. John VII was Greek, one of the Byzantine popes, but had better relations with the Lombards, who ruled much of Italy, than with Emperor Justinian II, who ruled the rest. A Greek native of Rossano in Calabria, his father, Plato, was the curator of the Palatine Hill for the Byzantine emperor. This makes John I Pope to be the son of a Byzantine official. His mother was called Blatta. Emperor Justinian II dispatched 2 metropolitan bishops, also sending with them a mandate in which he requested and urged the Pontiff of Rome to gather a council of the Apostolic Church and to confirm such of them as he approved and quash and reject those which were adverse. But he, terrified in his human weakness, sent them back to the prince by the same metropolitans without any emendations at all. He was buried in the chapel of the Blessed Virgin Mary, which had been added on to St. Peter's. Several monuments in Rome are connected with John. The most notable is the Santa Maria Antiqua Church at the foot of the Palatine Hill. Traces of an episcopal palace episcopium associated with John have been discovered upon the Palatine. Sicinius was a Greek. Sicinius was born in Tyre. His father's name was John. The paucity of donations to the papacy during his reign, 42 pounds of gold and 310 pounds of silver, a fraction of the personal donations of other contemporary pontiffs, indicate that he was probably not from the aristocracy. Sicinius was selected as pope during the period of Byzantine domination, succeeding John VII after a vacancy of 3 months. His pontificate lasted just 20 days. According to the Catholic Encyclopedia, although he was so afflicted with gout that he was unable even to feed himself, he is nevertheless said to have been a man of strong character, and to have been able to take thought for the good of the city. Among his few acts as pope was the consecration of a bishop for Corsica. He also ordered that lime be burned in order to restore portions of the walls of Rome. The restoration of the walls planned by Sicinius was eventually carried out by Gregory II. Sicinius was buried in Old St. Peter's Basilica. He was succeeded less than 2 months later by Constantine, who some historians believe was his brother. Constantinus was Greek. One of the last popes of the Byzantine papacy, the defining moment of Constantine's pontificate was his 710 and 711 visit to Constantinople, where he compromised with Justinian II on the Trullan canons of the Quinisext Council. Constantine's was the last papal visit to Constantinople until 1967. Constantine was born in Tyre. With the exception of Antipope Constantine, he was the only pope to bear such a quintessentially Eastern name of an emperor. Prior to becoming pope, he would visit Constantinople twice and build good rapport with the Emperor Constantine IV's son, Justinian II. After succeeding his brother and predecessor, Sicinius, as pope, he traveled to Constantinople, accompanied by the future Pope Gregory II, where he would give communion to Justinian II, who in turn issued confirmations of privileges to the Roman See. From 711 to 713, during the reign of the usurping emperor Philippicus Bardanes, Constantine would reject the ruler's monothelitism and refuse to commemorate the emperor in Mass. In June 713, the following emperor, Anastasius II, had Exarch Scholasticus deliver to the Pope a letter affirming his support for the Sixth General Council. St. Gregory II was Roman. He was an alleged collateral ancestor to the Roman Savelli family. The same was his predecessor, Pope Benedict II, a century prior. He would become a subdeacon during the reign of Sergius I, where he would eventually be made deacon and placed in charge of the Vatican Library. During Constantine's rule, he would become papal secretary, accompanying him to Constantinople. As pope, he would rebuild the city of Rome, repairing its walls and constructing litanies to avoid flooding from the Tiber. For much of his reign, Gregory would see expansion of the church into Germany, Britain, and Ireland. It was also at this time that Vulgar Latin was slowly evolving into the various Romance languages. He would reject Emperor Leo II's iconoclasms, ended the conflicts between the Lombards and the Byzantines on the peninsula, would support the elimination of an imperial usurper, and lay down the foundations of an independent papal state. Gregory died on the 11th of February 731 and was buried in St. Peter's Basilica. The location of his tomb has since been lost. His miracle would occur at the Battle of Toulouse in 721 against Islamic invaders, where he had sent the Duke of Aquitaine, Odo, baskets of blessed bread. It is said that those who had consumed the bread had not been killed or wounded. St. Gregory III was Greek. After appealing to Emperor Leo III to moderate his position on iconoclasm, Gregory would find that the Byzantine emperor would send a fleet to subjugate him. The fleet would successfully take the papal territories held in Sicily and Calabria, but shipwreck in the Adriatic. Additionally, Leo would fail to force the Duke of Naples to stop supporting the Pope. Gregory would in turn emphasize veneration of icons and relics. Gregory would further increase the faith in Northern Europe, primarily in what is today England and Germany. In 732, Gregory banned the consumption of horse meat, both domestic and wild, anathematizing it as an abomination and linking it with pagan ritual feasting. In 737, the Lombard king Liutprand would launch an assault against the Exarchate of Ravenna, taking it the following year. Liutprand would then go to war with the Pope and the Lombard dukes of Spoleto and Beneventum. Gregory would fail to halt Liutprand's encroachments due to Charles Martel's inability to provide support as he was battling the Islamic invaders. He was buried in St. Peter's Basilica, in the oratory he had built at the start of his pontificate. He was the last pope to seek the consent of the Byzantine Exarch of Ravenna for his election. Saint Zachary was Greek. He was the last pope of the Byzantine papacy. Zachary built the original church of Santa Maria sopra Minerva, forbade the traffic of slaves in Rome, negotiated peace with the Lombards with the return of papal possessions, and sanctioned Pepin the Short's usurpation of the Frankish throne from Childeric III. In 745, Zachary convened a synod in Rome to discourage a tendency toward the worship of angels. Zachary remonstrated with the Byzantine Emperor Constantine V Copronymus on his iconoclastic policies. Zachary built the original church of Santa Maria sopra Minerva over an ancient temple to Minerva near the Pantheon. He also restored the decaying Lateran palace, moving the relic of the head of St. George to the church of San Giorgio al Velabro. After Venetian merchants bought many slaves in Rome to sell to the Muslims of Africa, Zachary forbade such traffic and then paid the merchants their price, giving the slaves their freedom. He died around the 15th of March, 752, and was buried in St. Peter's Basilica. Zachary is regarded as a capable administrator and a skillful and subtle diplomat in a dangerous time. Stephen II was Roman. He was born a Roman aristocrat and member of the Orsini family. Stephen was the Bishop of Rome from the 26th of March, 752 to his death. His reign marks the historical delineation between the Byzantine papacy and the Frankish papacy. During Stephen's pontificate, Rome was facing invasion by the Lombards when Stephen II went to Paris to seek assistance from Pepin the Short. Pepin defeated the Lombards and made a gift of land to the Pope, eventually leading to the establishment of the Papal States. 751, the Lombard king Aistulf captured the Exarchate of Ravenna and turned his attention to the Duchy of Rome. Stephen, a Roman aristocrat and member of the Orsini family, was selected on the 26th of March, 752, to succeed Pope Zachary following the recent death of Pope-elect Stephen. Due to the Romans being too preoccupied with the Abbasids, Stephen would turn to Pepin the Younger, who had defeated the Umayyads, to deal with the Lombards. In 754, Stephen reconsecrated Pepin as king and gave him the role of protector of the church. Marching on the Lombards twice, Pepin would establish the territory of the Papal State. He was succeeded by his brother Paul I. St. Paul I was Roman. He first served as a Roman deacon and was frequently employed by his brother, Pope Stephen II, in negotiations with the Lombard kings. After Stephen's death on the 26th of April, 757, Paul prevailed over a faction that wanted to make Archdeacon Theophylact pope and was chosen to succeed his brother by the majority that wished a continuation of Stephen's policy. His reign was dominated by relations with the Frankish and Lombard kings and with the Eastern Roman Emperor. He wrote to Pepin the Younger that the Frankish alliance should be maintained unimpaired. On his return from suppressing a revolt in Benevento, Desiderius visited Rome and compelled Paul to write to Pepin asking him to concede all the Lombard claims. He promised to return Imola, but on condition that the Pope should persuade Pepin to send back Lombard hostages held by the Franks. Paul agreed and sent a letter to Pepin. Pepin found it advisable to maintain good relations with Desiderius, and Paul apparently accomplished little by his double-dealing. Later, however, Pepin gave the Pope some support and acted as arbiter between the Roman and Lombard claims. In 765, papal privileges were restored in the duchies of Benevento and Tuscany, and partially in Spoleto. As time went on, the influence of the Eastern Roman Empire would all but disappear. Stephen III was Greek. Stephen was a Benedictine monk who worked in the Lateran Palace during the reign of Pope Zachary. In the midst of a tumultuous contest by rival factions to name a successor to Pope Paul I, Stephen was elected with the support of the Roman officials. He summoned the Lateran Council of 769, which sought to limit the influence of the nobles in papal elections. The council also opposed iconoclasm. A Greek born in Sicily, Stephen III was the son of a man named Olivus. Coming to Rome during the pontificate of Pope Gregory III, he was placed in the monastery of St. Chrysogonus, where he became a Benedictine monk. Stephen gradually rose to high office in the service of successive popes and was at the bedside of the dying Pope Paul I. Stephen would begin his reign by blinding and torturing the antipopes and their supporters to death. The Frankish-Lombard alliance would cause much distress to Stephen, as the Lombard king Desiderius slowly encroached on papal territories unimpeded. Adrian I was Roman. He was the son of Theodore, a Roman nobleman. Adrian's reign would be marked by the successor disputes between Charlemagne, Carloman I's sons, and their backers led by the Lombard king Desiderius. After Adrian refused to back Desiderius's request in crowning Carloman's son king of the Franks, Desiderius would go to war against the Franks in papal state. Charlemagne would then besiege Pavia and take the Lombard crown for himself and send Desiderius to live the rest of his life in the Abbey of Corbie. From 781, Adrian began dating papal documents by the years of Charlemagne's reign, instead of the reign of the Byzantine emperor. With the Second Council of Nicaea in 787, Adrian would firmly condemn iconoclasm. In 787, Adrian elevated the English diocese of Lichfield to an archdiocese. Adrian restored some of the ancient aqueducts of Rome and rebuilt the churches of Santa Maria in Cosmedin and San Marco in Rome. At the time of his death at the age of 95, his was the longest pontificate since St. Peter, until it was surpassed by the 24-year papacy of Pius VI in the late 18th century. Only 3 other popes, Pius IX, Leo XIII, and John Paul II, have reigned for longer periods since. Saint Leo III was Roman. Protected by Charlemagne from the supporters of his predecessor, Adrian I, Leo subsequently strengthened Charlemagne's position by crowning him emperor. The coronation was not approved by most people in Constantinople, although the Byzantines, occupied with their own defenses, were in no position to offer much opposition to it. He was elected on the day Adrian I was buried, and consecrated on the following day. As the Romans didn't wish for Frankish ruling of whom was to be made the next pope, Charlemagne would be given keys of the Confession of St. Peter and be declared protector of the Holy See. In return, Leo would receive a large portion of treasure that had been won from the Avars. In 799, an attempt on Leo's life was made, with the assailants attempting to blind him and tear out his tongue. He would be saved by Charlemagne's men, and the following year would see his enemies exiled. On Christmas Day 800, Leo would crown Charlemagne as emperor, in turn angering a powerless empress, Irene of Athens, in Constantinople. He was a fierce defender of the Trinity. He was originally buried in his own monument. However, some years after his death, his remains were put into a tomb that contained the first 4 popes named Leo. In the 18th century, the relics of Leo the Great were separated from his namesakes, and he was given his own chapel.